Now that the voters of Crimea have made their decision, we wait for the rest of the world's reaction. Will this eventually be accepted, or will the diplomatic divide grow even wider? I'm joined now by two gentlemen with key insights on this. William Courtney, former U.S. ambassador to Georgia and Kazakhstan, with me here in the studio, and Alexander Nekrassov, a former advisor to the Kremlin from London. General, thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Ambassador Courtney, let me start with you first. The referendum is now over, and as we've just heard, an overwhelming vote to secede and reunite with Russia. What's next?
Well, the Soviet forces are, Russian forces are marshaled, mobilized just east of Ukraine. So there's a real risk that Russian forces will go into eastern Ukraine. The diplomatic strategy that the Kremlin seems to be following is to try to pursue some kind of federation agreement, which in essence would mean that the Kiev government would give up the eastern oblasts of Ukraine peacefully, and Russia would take control.
When you say eastern Ukraine, you're talking about an area that is not just Crimea, but an even bigger area.
That's correct. North of Crimea, a much larger area. The difference now, though, is that Crimea was taken in a surprise move with overwhelming numbers of Russian troops. Now Ukraine has had time to prepare. If Russian forces go into eastern Ukraine, there will be resistance. There will be shooting. There will be a lot of lives lost.
Okay, let's go to Alexander Nekrassov in London. And Alexander, you heard that. Is this going to happen? Is this referendum justification for an even bigger land grab?
No, I don't see it like that. I think actually that after that referendum, which was a test, by the way, and for Putin it was also important to see how many, what the voting would be, how many people would be voting in it, and so on. I think that now would come a period when we would listen to all those threats coming from all over the place, well, mainly from America and Western Europe. I don't think there is a lot of scope that America and Western Europe have, because all these sanctions will be very limited. The economy in America, it's technically bankrupt, just like Western Europe. They can't really afford to have anything happening that they will lose lots of money and lots of contracts. And I can even tell you that some of the big business deals are being discussed as this crisis unfolds. So we will see only symbolic moves. There will be a lot of shouting and screaming. I think that the deal is done. Crimea is now part of Russia.
Well, there's Alexander Nekrassov telling us the deal is done. Crimea is now part of Russia, and whatever sanctions the West and the United States imposes are going to be token sanctions. Do you believe that to be the case?
No. This strategy now that the West is going to pursue is going to be more akin to what it did after the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979. The West settled in for what turned out to be a 10-year effort to change the correlation of forces, to put it increasing pressure on Moscow for its occupation of Afghanistan, including selling Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, which took a toll on Soviet helicopters and aircraft. I think what we're going to see now are very substantial sanctions. Both Europe and America are going to do it. Chancellor Merkel of Germany said there would be massive political and economic damage to Russia if Russia continued its aggressive behavior.
Okay, Alexander, massive sanctions against Russia. Is Russia going to retaliate?
Well, as I said, I don't really see it going to happen. Of course, Russia will retaliate, but you can't really compare this situation with the invasion of Afghanistan and the response by the Americans. What you can compare with is that the Americans have created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan that hit them back. Now, let me tell you what will happen with Western Ukraine when it feels desperate. Already, one of the extremists, Yarosh, said that he will start blowing up gas pipes, the pipelines running to the West. Was he threatening Russia? He was threatening both Russia and the West. Believe me, these people who have seized power in Kiev, these are neo-fascist thugs, racists. They will threaten the West just as they're threatening Russia, because they wanted money quickly, they didn't get anything. The visit by the so-called Prime Minister Yatsenyuk to America showed us that he was expecting quick money, they didn't get anything. They're now desperate, they're sitting in that Rada, rubber-stamping laws, which are all illegal, technically speaking, and they don't know what to do. So what has happened, what the West has done, it has opened a Pandora box, and nobody knows what will happen after that. The delicate balance that existed in Ukraine, just like in Iraq, just like in Libya, no one knows in Washington, in London, in Paris, and Berlin what's going to happen now. This is opportunism of absolutely unbelievable scale.
Okay, Ambassador, you know, there's threats, counter threats, and we've heard that most of the day. But moving ahead to any kind of diplomatic resolution to this crisis, we're already hearing some kind of agreement, tacit as though it may be, that Putin may be amenable to the idea of expanding the OSCE monitors in Ukraine, sending more monitors into Ukraine. Is that somewhere, some compromise, some off-ramp that they could take there?
It's not an off-ramp. It would be a useful transparency measure. But right now, it looks as if Russia's really not interested in diplomacy. Secretary Kerry has made enormous efforts. President Obama has called President Putin 3 times, I believe, over the last couple of weeks, including today. But Russia shows no interest. If Russia has made the decision to use overwhelming force in Crimea, that doesn't suggest that diplomacy is really an option at this point. The correlation of forces between the West and Russia is going to have to change before diplomacy will make really fruitful progress.
Alexander, that's the Western view, that Russia has used overwhelming force, made a land grab and taken Crimea, and that it's not interested in diplomacy whatsoever. Do you believe that to be the case?
Of course not, because what we've seen is that this crisis in Ukraine has been caused by the by America and the European Union when it organized a coup in Kyiv. And you know, it's very strange to hear that Russia all of a sudden, you know, used overwhelming force in Ukraine, where, by the way, it has 25,000 troops stationed anyway, and where the situation was getting out of control. And if the Russian forces didn't interfere, we would have had the same situation in Crimea as we are witnessing now in the east of the country, where there's total turmoil, that was upheaval, there's violence, people are dying, there's shootings going on, and so on.
Okay.
Not to mention, by the way, that in Kyiv and in the West, armed gangs are terrorizing the people.
Okay.
So to say that it was, you know, a referendum with the threat of violence by the Russian troops, it's rubbish. It's rubbish.
Okay,
it was an overwhelming vote.
Right, I just want to give the ambassador the last word here. We're running out of time. We have a few seconds left. Alexander makes the point there that the government in Kiev right now is not a legitimate government. It's not elected, it's self-appointed.
Actually, the government is a result of a genuine popular uprising in Ukraine. And I think that's what scares Putin, because he's scared.
But shouldn't governments change through the ballot box, through elections? I mean, it sets a terribly bad precedent if the United States recognizes and supports people who overthrow a government by violent means.
Well, what happened was, you know, this was not really a violent overthrow of the government.
Whatever the case may be.
President Yanukovych lost his own supporters in the Rada in Ukraine, and so they voted with the opposition. This was a peaceful, popular uprising.
Okay, we're going to have to leave with Ambassador Courtney, Alexander Nekrassov in London. Thanks for joining us.